Okay, in today's lesson, we're going to look at how aperture impacts the overall look of an image. So you could have an image that is properly exposed, but it isn't the image that you want, or the subject isn't isolated enough from the background, whatever it might be. But you could have a properly exposed image, but not be correct. Okay, if you remember from the past, I've stated is that the meter could say that you're actually properly exposed, but it isn't what you want. So in this case here, we're using everything the same except for the shutter speed and the aperture is anything I'm changing. We shot this on Olympus camera, set up on a tripod using a 45 millimeter Olympus, which is the effective focal length of 90 millimeter, and it is an f1.8 lens, and everything stays the same, like I said, except for the shutter speed and the aperture. So this is the final image of what I was trying to get it to look. You'll see that the subject is separated from the background. Very little is in focus. The focus point was right here in the very top piece, but I just want to show you how aperture will impact it. So in this one here, it's the image that we showed to start with. It was setting at f1.8. The ISO is at 200, and the shutter speed is 1/100th of a second. So the background is fully blurred out. The subject, which is this bridge, is isolated from the background, so the subject stands out from everything else. You'll notice that the foreground here and underneath it are blurred out, basically because of depth of field set by the aperture. Okay, so we're going to stop here. I'm going to go back to show you the chart we discussed in the past. So basically it goes like this. Your smaller numbers are a wider opening in your aperture, in your lens. We're not going to get crazy technical. So we're starting at f1.8, which will be very similar to this f2, and we're going to go all the way up to f22 on the lens. And so you'll see here, this chart that we've discussed in the past is the subject would be isolated at about here, and as you go up in there, the subject becomes almost part of the background. Okay, so that's what we're going to show. So this was the first image. Again, this is what my goal was, to separate the subject, the bridge, from the background. We're going to go to f2.8, and so the shutter speed, we went from 1/100th of a second to 1/50th, and we changed the aperture to f2.8. So by changing the shutter speed in half, we've kept the exposure the same, so the meter is stating that everything is the same. But you notice that the background is still blurred out, but it's not the same as in this first image. Completely blurred out, really nice, very much separation. But you'll see right here is, if you notice, this is in focus, but just directly behind it, where the back part of the bridge is, that is out of focus. You see here in this, you're getting a little bit more in focus, but still not that much. But the background keeps it separated, so this isn't too bad. We're going to change to 1/20th of a second, and the aperture is 1/40th. You'll notice that the background is starting to come in. You're actually starting to make out a little bit of shapes. You're going to compare it to this. Again, this is kind of a lot of blurs. And here, the f4 at 1/20th of a second. So the other thing I wanted to show you is, see how you have the very front here is in focus, and here it's just starting to come in, right where the cursor is. It's starting to come in, and definitely much more than here. And if you notice in the f4, the foreground is starting to come in more in focus. Now we're going to go to this next one, 5.6, which is about the focal length, or the aperture, that many folks state that they have. When you buy a kit lens, you're going to go anywhere from 3.5 to 5.6. It's usually a variable. You'll notice now that the bridge, even the front part of the bridge, and even the back part is starting to be in focus. In the background, you're starting to actually make out the shapes as to they are something, and this is starting to look cluttered. No longer is it a very separated image. You notice that the shutter speed is 1/10th of a second now. The aperture is 1 at 5.6. The ISO hasn't changed. So let's go back to the very first one. You notice that was completely blurred out. This was even blurred out here. Now we'll go to f8. F8 gives this all here is completely focused, very, very nice in here, but unfortunately, because of the aperture, the background is starting to come into play, and you're actually able to make out part of the background. You can see that this looks sort of like a couch with some stuff on a table or something in front of it. And so the subject no longer is separated from the background. So we're at f8, and again we have the shutter speed from the previous image to 1/6 of a second. Now we're at f11. F11 is letting in less light, and so we're letting in less light through the aperture, or that was the iris on the lens. But to do so, we now have to continue to reduce the shutter speed down. Again, I'm on a tripod, which is keeping this all equal. You're able to make out some of the background. It looks like something like when you go to a get your eyes checked, it's starting to come into focus. Definitely the bridge here is all focus. Go back to the original image of the goal. You'll see here that none of this was in focus, just this first plane here. Okay, so this was at f11. f16, you're actually able to make out some of the birds in the background. Oh, they're slightly blurry. So again, one of those things, you go to the eye doctor and you say, well, the first one was slightly better. You know how that works. So what you have here is that the bridge here is completely in focus, but nothing is separated in the background, making it cluttered and actually making it a challenge to, it's no longer what I would call a pleasing image. You see the little flower over on the stand there. You see the bowl and the other items here, making this very cluttered. So you see the difference without changing the focal length, just changing the aperture and cutting in half each time, the shutter speed to match. You went from this is fully exposed, just like these are all saying that they are exposed correctly. According to the meter, they are properly exposed. And then the final image is at f22. The lens is closed completely on what it will do. In the background, you can pretty much read everything. You see that it's there. This is not isolated at all. In fact, all these things underneath it are coming in. And the foreground now is in focus. You can see that it's sitting on some sort of wood. And so again, this is showing the difference between, all we're doing is changing the aperture, and then of course the shutter speed, we keep having it as we go through this to let in the proper light. But basically, if you're looking in your camera and you're looking at your metering, the meter is going to say that this is properly exposed. Every image is properly exposed. Okay, to summarize, what I want to emphasize is this, is that the meter could state that what you're doing is properly exposing the scene, but it might not be creating the image that you want to create. So again, if you remember from past times we've discussed this, is that you're out there to create an image, just not take pictures. So creating an image, you must have that image set in your mind first. So in this case here, we're going to go back to the original image that I wanted to create, and that was an isolated bridge from its background. And so I set the ISO to the lowest it would go, which on my camera is ISO 200. So I set the ISO first. We will talk about more about ISO in future discussions. But I set the ISO first because I knew that the room was well lit. I went in there and I was able to tell. I've done this before. So you get used to, once you've taken quite a few photographs, you get used to what you want the setting to be. The other reason I knew that I could set it to ISO 200 is because I was placed a camera on a tripod and I wasn't moving anything, so therefore camera motion or camera movement would not be an impact or make an impact on the scene itself or the images. So again, this was the image I wanted to create at f1.8. ISO was 200 and 1/100th of a second. Going all the way down to I'm going to put it, we'll go to 5.6, which as if many people have on their cameras, this is what they end up with, about a focal length based on a variable zoom lens that came with the camera, basically what's called a kit lens. So this will give indication of why a lot often the images don't look good. Now, if I were not on a tripod and I tried to hand hold 1/10 of a second, there's a good chance that this would be blurred out, which we will talk about more in a different episode about how the shutter speed will impact motion or introduce camera blur. But in this case here, all I wanted to show you was how this was the image I wanted to create at f1.8. and it's standard f5.6, and if I'm going all the way to f22, you'll see that it brings the background completely in. So I hope this helps understand a little bit more about how aperture impacts the depth of field, but also how you could have a perfectly good exposed image. Now this here is something we've showed in the past, but according to this, the exposure meter is saying is that I'm 1/3 of a stop underexposed in here, but the meter could say that it is perfectly exposed, but it might not be the image that I want to create. So I hope this helped. Check back and we'll talk more.